New Deep Dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we dive into a whole stack of sources, cut through the noise, and really pull out the key insights for you.
Yeah, get right to the good stuff.
Exactly. And today, wow, we're tackling a story that kicks off with this incredibly chilling anecdote. It might be, slightly embellished by Eastern Roman historians, but it perfectly captures the sheer importance of the man we're discussing.
Oh, it really sets the stage, doesn't it?
Hmm.
So the story goes, this is 454 AD, right after Emperor Valentinian III kills Aetius.
Right.
He supposedly turns to a Roman official, asks him, did I do well?
How'd I do?
Basically.
Yeah, and the official's reply is just stark. He says something like, whether well or ill, I don't really know, but I do know that with your left hand, you just cut off your right.
You cut off your right hand. That's such a visceral image. It paints Aetius as completely indispensable, doesn't it? He gets called the last Roman, sometimes the last true Roman.
And for some of those Eastern historians, his death wasn't just a murder. It was like the symbolic end of the whole Western Roman Empire, which is a huge weight to put on one person's shoulders.
It really speaks volumes about where he stood. I mean, for 2 decades, tumultuous decades, he was essentially the de facto ruler, wasn't he? The guy holding together an empire that was, let's be honest, crumbling.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We want to unpack how Aetius, with his incredibly unique background and his, let's call them pragmatic strategies,
Sometimes ruthless strategies.
definitely ruthless at times, how he became the central figure, how did he keep the Western Empire afloat against, frankly, unbelievable odds, and then what led to that dramatic end. We want to give you that clear path to understanding him in this really complex time.
A shortcut, basically, to grasping why he mattered so much.
Exactly. So to really get Aetius, we need to picture the world he stepped into. Think early 5th century. On the map, the Western Roman Empire still looks massive, right? Mediterranean, Britain, the Balkans.
Looks like a superpower.
Yeah, but underneath, it was deeply weakened. Constant internal power struggles, borders under pressure everywhere, just simmering instability.
A really key moment setting that stage was the death of Emperor Theodosius I back in 395 AD. That's when the empire officially split permanently into East and West. His sons, Arcadius in the east, Honorius in the west.
And that wasn't just lines on a map, it was a fundamental weakening, right?
Absolutely. Less central control. And in the west, you've got young Honorius, but the real power, initially anyway, was Flavius Stilicho.
Ah, Stilicho, the big military commander, Honorius's guardian, the most important guy in the West for a while there.
He had some wins, yeah.
Yeah.
Pushed back Alaric and the Goths a bit around 401, but it felt like plugging leaks in a dam that's about to burst.
The threats just kept coming. I mean, 410 AD, Alaric's Goths actually sack Rome itself.
Which was symbolically huge, of course. Though it's worth remembering the actual imperial court wasn't even there anymore. They'd moved to Ravenna back in 402.
Safer, right? Harder to get to.
Much safer. So Rome falling wasn't the functional end, but it was a massive psychological blow, a real wake-up call.
But maybe even more impactful, long-term for the West, was that Rhine crossing in 406 AD.
Oh, definitely. Winter 406. The Rhine freezes over. And it's not just a raid, it's this massive movement of peoples, Sui, Vandals, Alans pouring into Gaul.
And they're not just raiding, are they? They're looking to stay.
Exactly. That's the game changer. They're settling, carving out territory. It fundamentally alters Gaul forever. We also see Burgundians, Franks getting involved, trying to hold the line for Rome initially because of treaties, but eventually setting up their own kingdoms too.
So alliances are just incredibly shaky.
Completely fluid. Temporary deals, shifting loyalties, makes long-term strategy almost impossible.
You see that with Ataulf, right? Alaric's successor with the Visigoths.
Perfect example. First, he backs the usurper Jovinus, then Honorius pressures him so he turns against Jovinus. It's, hard to keep track.
And tangled up in all this is Galla Placidia, Honorius's half-sister.
Right, captured by the Goths back in 410. Then Ataulf actually marries her in 414.
Bold move. Trying to force Rome's hand, get a military rank.
That was the idea. Leverage her status for his own legitimacy. Didn't quite work out as planned, though, and eventually she was returned to the Romans.
So into this absolute chaos, this world of shifting sands, Aetius is born. And his background is just tailor-made for this era, isn't it? Roman elite meets barbarian insider.
It's an incredible combination.
Yeah.
Born around 390, Durostorum on the Danube frontier. His dad, Gaudentius, a top Roman general magister equitum per Gallius, cavalry commander in Gaul. Sicilian roots, but Roman military through and through. His mother, an Italian aristocrat.
So, boom, instant access, military circles, aristocratic circles. He's got a foot in both worlds from day one.
And it wasn't just connections. Young age, like 12 or 13, he gets this post in the Praetorian Guard Tribunus at Notarius Praetorianus.
Not a fighting role, though?
No, more like a representative role, designed to get him into the imperial court, learn the ropes of public service, politics, grooming him, basically.
But then comes the really unusual part, the hostage experience.
Yeah, and we need to be clear. Hostage back then wasn't always like, locked in a dungeon. It was a standard way to guarantee treaties. Often uncomfortable, sure, but standard practice.
And Aetius was a hostage twice.
Twice. First, with the Goths under Alaric himself. Spent about 3 years there, around 405 AD.
And there's that story, maybe a bit romanticized, that Alaric actually liked him, taught him military stuff.
That's the tradition, yeah. The future sacker of Rome mentoring the future defender of Rome. Quite something, if true. Then later, he spends time with the Huns.
When was that?
Possibly around 410, maybe a bit later. Honorius was trying to hire like 10,000 Hunnic cavalry around then.
Yeah.
Details are scarce, but the key thing is he lived among them, learned their culture, their leaders, how they fought.
Okay, so that's the crucial takeaway from his youth. This wasn't just happening to him, it was forming him. He got this deep first-hand understanding of these barbarian groups, their leaders, their motivations, their strengths, their weaknesses.
Exactly. No other Roman leader had that kind of intimate lived experience. He could connect with them, anticipate them, negotiate with them on a level others simply couldn't. It was, like you said earlier, his superpower.
Which explains how he could later implement those settlement policies, putting Alans here, Burgundians there.
Right, in the 440s, settling Alans near Toulouse, Burgundians in Sapodia. It wasn't just force. It was about using his understanding to integrate them, turn potential enemies into buffers or even allies. A long-game strategy.
But getting the power to implement those strategies, that wasn't straightforward. His rise was pretty ruthless.
Oh, absolutely. Pragmatic doesn't quite cover it sometimes. After Honorius dies in 423, Aetius backs the usurper, John. He even brings in a Hunnic army to support him.
The sources say like 60,000 Huns, which sounds inflated.
Probably, yeah. Exaggerated for effect. But the point is, he leveraged his Hunnic connections early on.
But then John loses. And Aetius? He doesn't go down with the ship.
Not at all. This is where you see his political genius, or maybe just survival instinct. He manages to negotiate a pardon from the new regime, the young Emperor Valentinian III, and his very powerful mother, Galla Placidia. Not only a pardon, he gets a top job.
Yeah.
Comes a military command.
Incredible to be on the losing side and come out stronger.
It showed he could read the political winds like nobody else. But then came something really shocking for the time.
The assassination of Felix.
Yeah, Flavius Constantius Felix, his main rival for military power. In 430 AD, Aetius arranges for Felix and his wife to be killed. Just eliminated.
Wow, that's blunt.
It was unprecedented, really, for a Roman official to just take out a rival like that. But it worked. It cleared the path for Aetius to become Magister Militum, supreme commander of the Western armies. The top dog, militarily speaking.
But even that wasn't secure yet, was it? The clash with Bonifacius.
Right, 432 AD. Bonifacius was another powerful general, governor of Africa. They went up in a civil war. Aetius actually loses the Battle of Ariminum. It's pretty much the only major battle he's known to have lost.
He lost the battle, but won the war, in a way.
Sort of. Bonifacius dies shortly after the battle, maybe from a wound Aetius himself inflicted. And what does Aetius do?
Let me guess. Calls his Hun friends.
You got it.
Hmm.
He retreats, gathers more Hunnic support under their leader Rugula this time, and basically forces his way back into power. By 435, he's Magister Militum again, and he gets the prestigious title of Patrician.
The man was relentless. A true survivor, using those Hunnic connections again and again.
It shows how central those early experiences were. They weren't just background. They were his key strategic asset throughout his career.
So despite all the backstabbing and chaos, he does become this figure of stability, especially in Gaul. That seemed to be his main focus.
Gaul was absolutely vital, the economic heartland, the buffer against northern tribes. When he comes there in 425, his first job was kicking the Goths out of Arles. Then he campaigned against the Franks in 428, secured a peace treaty a few years later, always putting out fires.
But sometimes starting them too. That Burgundian massacre sounds horrific.
It does. 436 AD. The sources claim he, likely with Hunnic help again, wiped out something like 20,000 Burgundians. It's a staggering number, possibly exaggerated, but it signals a brutal efficiency, one of the bloodiest internal actions of the period.
He clearly wasn't afraid to use overwhelming force when he thought it necessary.
Not at all. but he also dealt with the Visigoths through a mix of war and diplomacy. They besieged Narbonne in 437. He fought them, defeated them, secured peace, and then he married a Gothic princess.
Ah, cementing the alliance personally.
It's
Smart.
It's this blend force, diplomacy, personal ties, and that deep understanding that allowed him to build what historians call this network of agreements and alliances.
That network sounds crucial, like the real foundation of his power in a fragmenting world.
It was everything. It's what let him manage Gaul, and it's what proved absolutely vital when the ultimate threat arrived. Attila and the Huns. And those settlement policies we mentioned earlier, settling Alans, Burgundians, that was part of building this network, creating buffer zones, potential allies, integrating groups rather than just fighting them constantly.
And the result of all this maneuvering and managing.
The result was 20 years where Aetius, not the emperor, was basically running the show in the West, holding it together. And think about this. Unprecedented loyalty. No recorded revolts from his officers during his whole time as Magister Militum.
That's amazing given the times.
It really is. He was even consul 3 times, an honor usually just for emperors or their family. Shows his dominance.
Okay, so Aetius builds this. Fragile stability. Then comes the ultimate test. Attila turns his attention west.
Right. Attila takes sole power from his brother Bleda around 445. Initially, like we said, he's focused on the Eastern Empire. They were paying him off, basically protection money, because they were busy fighting Persia.
Makes sense. Easy money. So why shift to the west around 450?
Well, a couple of things. The Eastern Empire wised up, basically. They strengthened their defenses along the Danube and, crucially, stopped the payments. Raiding the East wasn't profitable anymore.
So Attila looks west, sees maybe weaker defenses, more opportunity?
Perhaps. The West was certainly politically fractured, even with the Aetius holding things together, and Attila was brilliant at finding excuses, pretexts for war.
Like the story of the stolen chalice?
Yeah, there was one minor one, but the big one, the really famous one, is the Honoria incident.
Valentinian III's sister.
Exactly. Just Grata Honoria. Apparently unhappy with her situation, maybe an arranged marriage she didn't want, she secretly sends her ring and a message to Attila asking for help.
Asking for help, which Attila interprets how?
As a marriage proposal.
Yeah.
And a claim to half the Western Roman Empire as her dowry.
Wow. Talk about opportunistic. From damsel in distress to a claim on the empire.
Whether Honoria intended that or not, Attila seized on it. It gave him a perfect, almost legitimate-sounding reason to invade. Then there was a final trigger.
The Frankish succession.
Right. A dispute between 2 brothers over leadership of the Salian Franks. Aetius, playing the long game as always, supports and maybe even adopts the younger brother. Attila backs the elder. Now it's personal, direct opposition. War is inevitable.
Which leads us to the Catalaunian Plains, 451 AD Gaul.
And this is where Aetius' network truly pays off. His diplomacy is masterful. He pulls together this incredible coalition. Romans, yes, but also Visigoths under King Theodoric.
His former enemies, now allies.
Exactly. And Alans, Franks, the ones loyal to Aetius' guy, Burgundians, Armoricans, Britons, all these groups who probably distrusted each other and definitely distrusted Rome, but saw Attila as the bigger threat, the lesser evil argument in action.
So the battle itself, June 451.
Incredibly brutal, lasted hours. Huge casualties on both sides. Theodoric, the Visigoth king, was actually killed, but in the end, Aetius' coalition holds the field. Attila is forced back to his wagon fort.
Aetius wins.
Let that.
But then Attila gets away.
He does. Aetius besieges the Hunnic camp, but Attila isn't destroyed. And the chroniclers, like Jordanes later, suggest Aetius deliberately let him slip away.
Why on earth would he do that?
Sounds counterintuitive, right? But think strategically, like Aetius clearly did. His most powerful allies at Catalonia were the Visigoths. If they had completely annihilated the Huns, the Visigoths might have become too powerful, a new dominant threat right inside Gaul.
Ah, the balance of power. Keep your enemies weak, but maybe don't let your allies get too strong either.
It seems that was the calculation. Let Attila escape, weakened but still a potential counterweight to Gothic ambition. Ruthless pragmatism again.
So Attila retreats from Gaul, but he's not done. The next year, 452, he invades Italy.
Yeah, catches everyone by surprise, crossing the Julian Alps. Sacks major cities in the north. Aquileia is utterly destroyed. Milan, Bergamo, Concordia.
And where's Aetius during all this? Italy itself is being ravaged.
That's a really good question, and historians still debate it. Aetius doesn't seem to engage Attila directly in Italy with a major field army. Why? We don't know for sure.
Any theories?
Well, one unconfirmed idea floats around that it might have been tied to politics with the East. Valentinian III was maybe reluctant to fully back the new Eastern Emperor, Marcian, which might have hampered Aetius' ability to request Eastern troops. But that's speculation. It could just be that the Western army was depleted after Catalonia, or that logistical challenges were too great.
So Italy suffers, but Attila doesn't take Rome.
No. He stops, makes peace, famously meeting with Pope Leo I, though the Pope's influence is probably overstated. More likely, plague was hitting his army hard, supplies were running low, and maybe troops from the Eastern Empire were finally moving towards Italy. So Attila turns around and leaves Italy.
He dies just a year later, doesn't he?
Yeah, 453. Hemorrhage on his wedding night, apparently. The Hunnic Empire fragments almost immediately after his death. Aetius had faced the ultimate storm and survived, but his own end was coming, from a much closer source.
It's incredible, isn't it? He navigates civil wars, barbarian migrations, Attila himself, only to be brought down by the emperor he served.
It boils down to dynastic ambition versus imperial insecurity. Aetius, he's getting older now, probably around 60 after Catalonia. He wants to secure his family's future.
How?
He pushes for his son. Got anxious to remember, his mother was a Gothic princess to marry Valentinian III's daughter, Placidia the Younger.
Marrying into the imperial family, linking his bloodline to the throne.
Exactly. Cementing his family's influence for the next generation. He probably saw it as stabilizing the empire long-term, ensuring continuity through his lineage.
But Valentinian didn't see it that way.
Not at all. Valentinian was famously insecure, had lived in Aetius' shadow for decades. And he had advisors, especially the eunuch Heraclius, whispering in his ear that Aetius was getting too powerful, aiming too high.
This marriage proposal was the last straw.
It seems like it. Maybe Valentinian felt it was an intrusion into the one area he still controlled his own family, the imperial succession. It felt like a direct challenge.
So, the setup. September 454 AD.
Valentinian summons Aetius to the palace in Ravenna. The pretext. Just discussing state finances. Routine stuff. Then, according to the sources, Valentinian suddenly explodes. Accuses Aetius of treason, of trying to steal his throne through this marriage plot. Before Aetius can likely react, Valentinian draws his own sword.
The emperor himself.
Yes, Valentinian strikes the first blow, hitting Aetius in the head. Then he and his loyalists, possibly Heraclius included, just fall upon Aetius and his entourage, killing them right there in the palace.
Just like that, the indispensable man, gone. Cut down by the emperor's own hand.
Brutal and personal. And it fulfilled that chilling prophecy from the start, didn't it? With your left hand, you cut off your right.
And the consequences were immediate, right? Rome didn't stabilize under Valentinian.
Far from it. Valentinian had killed the one man who commanded the army's real loyalty. Less than a year later, March 455, Valentinian himself is assassinated.
By whom?
By two former bodyguards of Aetius, men loyal to their old commander, apparently encouraged by a senator named Petronius Maximus, who had his own grievances with Valentinian.
So chaos follows chaos. Maximus takes over.
Briefly. Very briefly. Maximus forces Valentinian's widow to marry him, and tries to marry his son to Valentinian's daughter, the one promised to Aetius' son. But she was also betrothed to the son of Gaiseric, the Vandal king.
Oh, this is messy.
Incredibly, Gaiseric uses this as a pretext. May 455, the Vandals sail from Carthage, land near Rome, and sack the city far more thoroughly than Alaric ever did. Maximus is killed trying to flee.
Just one disaster after another.
And it continues. The Western Empire limps on, emperor after puppet emperor, until 476 AD. Just 21 years after Aetius was murdered. His death wasn't the cause of the fall, the rot was deep, but it removed the last effective defender, the last real strategist holding the line.
So Aetius' legacy, complicated but undeniably huge.
Absolutely. He's this unique figure straddling the Roman and barbarian worlds like no one else. That understanding, forged by his upbringing, allowed him to keep the West functioning, to hold it together against the odds for 20 critical years. Killing him really did cripple Rome's ability to defend itself.
It leaves you with that big what if, doesn't it? What if Aetius hadn't been assassinated? What if that dynastic marriage had happened? Could he have steered the West through the next few decades?
It's impossible to know, of course. But his story makes you think about leadership in times of crisis, about the balance between pragmatism, ruthlessness, and diplomacy, about what happens when the strong right hand is suddenly violently removed. What does it take for an empire or any complex system to survive when its key figures are gone?
A lot to ponder there. A fascinating figure and a truly pivotal moment in history.
Subscribe. New Deep Dive.